Welcome to another episode of the Power Law Investor. Today is September 5th, 2024. Bitcoin is at 55,800 and Kaspa is just about 14 and a half cents. So today we'll be discussing how the daily DCA and using the Power Law to invest is coming along. And also what's going on with the Power Law and Kaspa in particular. Is the power law still valid for Kaspa? What can we expect going forward? And what's going on? Are there some mathematical ways to understand what's happening? So as a reminder, the power law is simply the trend line of the price data relative to time. It is a line in the log space with a very high R squared value, and this transforms into a curved line in linear space. If this sounds complicated to you, look at my previous video and you'll get an idea what we're talking about here. But basically, and I'll quickly summarize here so you can get up to speed, because who really has time to click on another video? We want to watch something with carrots instead. This is for Bitcoin, and we have this price data that's been logarithmically transformed. We have time on the x-axis and price on the y-axis. And we've transformed those using logarithms, which is just a way of compressing the data down. And when we look at the world in this way, we can see that this line, the orange line, does a really good job of predicting how the price is moving over time. And that's what this number, the 0.9555, is saying. It's telling us that this is a pretty good line. This line explains what's going on very well. Okay, and 95% of the variation in the price data is explained by this equation. So if we want to look at where we are in terms of our investments, I think that I made the last video sometime towards the end of August. You can see that we've been daily DCAing in with $100 daily, and I've developed this algorithm that gets updated on a daily basis and tells us what the allocation should be. So for today, for September 5th, it's saying that based upon what the predicted returns are using the power law, what should be the distribution of that $100? So 55, just over 55 should go into Kaspa, and just under 25 should go into Bitcoin, and we should be holding 20% in cash. Okay. And so here, the spreadsheet is my the spreadsheet is updated daily. That tells us where we are, and as we can see, here is where we are right now. You'll notice that there's a couple of interesting things going on over here in terms of some limit orders that I have placed. And the reason we're able to place these limit orders is because we've been dedicating 20% daily to cash. And that has been built up, so that 20% daily is now at 340. And I'm setting up Kaspa limit orders for $100 each at 0.135 and 0.125. And I'll explain why a little bit later in this video. So let's look at what's going on with Bitcoin and what's going on with Kaspa. So first, focusing on Bitcoin, in the log space, we've already talked about how this data is generated. But if we jump down into what the price action is looking like on a linear chart, we can see that we are now way below trend, right? And is this something to worry about? Not particularly. You can see in the past we bounced around this area quite a bit. Is it a great buying opportunity? Well, we'd ideally like to buy as low as possible, but that would mean that we're looking for Bitcoin to drop down to about 39K. Now, how are these different lines generated? They're simply generated by looking at a percentage of what the power law is. So the orange line is the power law, but the dotted green line is at a 50% discount. The purple line is at a 40% discount, and the orange line is a 30% discount. So if the power law said it was $100, we're looking at $50, $60, and $70, right? And so we can see in the past that if you can get it around a 50% discount, that's really good. It almost always bounces back up. Let me just zoom out here so we can see. So is it falling down to this particular zone something to be worried about? Not particularly, but we don't know how much lower Bitcoin could go. And the algorithm, of course, takes care of all of that. The more attractive Bitcoin becomes as an asset, the more of our resources shift into buying Bitcoin. But in terms of predicting where the market is going to go in the short term, the power law really doesn't tell us too much about that. So that's why we always want to make sure that we have some cash if the price drops down considerably, and we believe that it's going to hit the power law trend line in the future. We definitely want to have some cash reserves for that. And so Bitcoin, as we can see, is still above the minus 30% trend line. But if we go ahead and look at what's happening with Kaspa, we see some rather interesting behavior. Right now, Kaspa and Bitcoin are different. The equations are different. Their behavior is going to be quite different. But let's just look at what's happened here so far. What we're seeing is we were bouncing above the trend line. Even at the end of February, we were almost at 18 cents, or February 20th. But then we dipped below the trend line and have been bouncing. Well, we maybe hit the trend line briefly, but then we're bouncing around it from underneath, right? And right now, the price is about... This was updated yesterday, so it's 15.5 cents or so. But really, is this a good opportunity to buy, or what's going on over here? So we can examine this by looking at what Kaspa's history has been to see if this is a good buying opportunity or not. And if we look at that, zoom out again, we can see most of the time, or there's a tendency for it to hit one of these lines or above these lines, and then bounce back up, all right? And the question we always want to find out here, we can zoom in here a little bit closer too. You can see what it was like. It bounced on this, it bounced off the purple line. So is buying around the purple line, which for us right now is about 15.8 cents. Look, no one really knows the future, right? But there are a couple of caveats here that we should think about. One is that just to be clear, that the data here is daily data, so you may have wicks during the day that actually dip down below some of these values, right? And in the past, the minus 50% trend line has been pretty solid even for wicks. So it's hit the minus 50% trend line and then bounced up. So right now, on September 5th, Kaspa probably has a pretty strong bottom of around 13.5 cents. Of course, it could go lower, but 13.5 cents is good, which is why I've placed a limit order for $100 at 0.135 cents, because we could just get it. And if we get it on a wick, great. And I've added another order below that for 0.125 cents. I think it's unlikely that it gets here, but anything could happen because we don't have that much history with Kaspa, right? And that's what the difference is between Kaspa and Bitcoin. We've only got data for about 828 days, whereas with Bitcoin, we've got data for, 5,000 plus days. And the price for that lack of data is the fact that we can end up with returns that look like this, 231%, 500% in a year's time, right? And 231 in 6 months' time. So, if you're putting in $1 and you're expecting to get not just doubling it, but $2 in profit, $2 plus in profit, you're going to have, it's going to be less reliable, right? And if you want to stick with Bitcoin, on the other hand, Silk will be getting excellent returns, but they are lesser, right? With Bitcoin, the expected return is 55% and then 85% for a year. So that's kind of where we're at. I'd like to talk a little bit about Kaspa and how mathematically the equation is changing as we have this period of time that we've spent under the trend line, right? So what's happening is, as we're getting more and more days under the orange trend line, it's pulling the trend line down, and that gets reflected in this equation over here, right? So this used to be a 4.0. This is now a 4.05. If you look at my last video, it was 4.06, which means that the trend line is being pulled down. Now, is this something to worry about? I would say likely not at this point. In a future video, which I will do at some point, you can see how the parameters for Bitcoin early on in the Bitcoin journey also fluctuated a little bit. And so a small drop of less than 1% in the exponent is not something that we really need to worry about at this point. But, everyone should do their own research and figure out their own risk parameters, because we have had this chunk of time in which the value has been below the trend line over here, right? But let's say in the worst case scenario, you think, oh my God, I don't believe this trend line. Let me look at the minus 30% trend line or the minus 50% trend line. How bad of a price would it be right now? Well, right now, even if you took a minus 50% trend, which has happened in the past for just very short periods of time, you'd be above the current price by the end of November. That means there's a very good chance that you'd be able to, if you bought today at 14.5 cents, you'd be able to exit at 16 cents, at least in a worst case scenario. Of course, we don't know what happens. Bitcoin could crash and put everything down with it. But based on the power law and these mathematics, it's not a bad bet to play. So that's what we're all about, balancing risk and reward, and that's what the power law allows us to do. So based on this particular analysis, you can see why I've decided to use some of the cash that we had saved up to place these two limit orders. Let's see what happens over the next few days, weeks, months. And as always, thanks for listening. If you like the content, thumbs up and subscribe, and drop me a comment about what else you'd like to see. All the best, and see you guys again soon.